Today, we're really jumping into something pretty unexpected. We've got sources looking at this intersection of culture, personal expression, and, well, politics. Specifically, we're tackling this tension, this, almost default assumption you hear everywhere, that if you embrace cross-dressing, you basically have to be politically on the left, aligned with the Democrats.
Right. It's treated almost like a given.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the argument presented in these materials, the claim that this assumption is, well, fundamentally flawed.
Precisely. We're looking at the case made that personal freedom, which these sources say is the real driver behind cross-dressing, actually finds a comfortable home, maybe even thrives more under center-right or Republican values.
It's definitely a counterintuitive idea for many.
It is. And just to be clear, we're analyzing the argument itself, not endorsing it. We're looking at how they connect individual liberty, a sort of core Republican idea, to protecting personal eccentricity.
Okay, let's get into it then. What are these sources saying? What's this surprising philosophy we need to understand? How does republicanism become, as the authors put it, a shield for eccentricity? Well, first, we have to acknowledge the backdrop, right? Especially post-2024 election. The headlines, the general media narrative, it's pretty consistently about Republicans being, frankly, anti-trans or hostile to anyone blurring gender lines.
Oh, absolutely. You hear about the bathroom bills, the bans on transgender athletes in sports, certain school policies. It paints a very specific picture.
Yeah, a picture of sort of cultural warfare against gender nonconformity.
But this is where the material we're looking at says, hold on a minute. It argues that for the center-right, at least in terms of political action, adult cross-dressing is largely seen as a personal choice, not really a legislative target.
So the argument is the administration has bigger fish to fry.
That's the gist of it, yeah. The focus, according to these sources, is much more on things like economic stability, border security, deregulation, basically keeping government out of your personal business as much as possible.
Okay, but how does that work in practice? Because there are social conservatives within the party.
That's a key point the sources tackle. They make this really crucial distinction between cross-dressing as a personal expression and what they term legislated identity politic. Meaning, the argument goes, as long as you're an adult making a personal choice for yourself, and crucially, you're not demanding the world rearrange itself around your preferences, then the administration, politically speaking, couldn't care less.
So it's about individual action versus demanding systemic change.
That seems to be the core distinction they're drawing. The political energy, they argue, is directed at perceived overreach, like mandating certain teachings in schools or compelling speech, rather than policing what consenting adults do privately.
Right. And that brings us back to that core Republican philosophy. The sources connect this to individual liberty, that whole you do you, I'll do me, just keep the government out of it idea.
Exactly. And framed not as a call for conformity, but again as that shield for eccentricity. It allows space for difference as long as that difference doesn't impose itself on others through policy.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift a bit. How do these sources define cross-dressing itself? What's the sort of essence they're tapping into?
They really frame it as an act of rebellion. A rebellion against rigidity, against societal expectations. It's described as a celebration of fluidity, of finding authenticity against the grain.
A personal rebellion.
Yes, and that feeling, that internal pushback against the norm is something the sources then connect to other Republican tenets.
Like what?
Well, things like the emphasis on Second Amendment rights or free speech absolutism or even entrepreneurship. The argument is they all stem from the same root, empowering the individual against the collective, whether that collective is government or societal pressure.
Okay, I see the philosophical link. Does it get practical? Do they cite actual benefits?
They do. The sources argue that Republican policies like, say, lower taxes and deregulation actually create a better environment for pursuing this interest.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you want to start a small business related to cross-dressing, maybe a blog, selling custom outfits online, even a local support group, the argument is that less regulation and lower taxes make that easier.
More money in your pocket for hobbies, less red tape for small ventures.
Precisely. It fosters that entrepreneurial spirit, even for niche communities. The market supports it, not the government mandating it.
And this is where we get that really vivid quote, right? The one from the logistics manager in Texas.
Yes, the guy who votes Republican and cross-dresses privately. His line really sums up this perspective. Government's for roads and defense. My wardrobe's off limits.
It's just so direct. It draws a very clear line.
It really does. It perfectly illustrates that principle. Live your truth, but don't feel the need to legislate it or seek state validation for it. For him, freedom is the absence of government interference in his personal life.
Which, the sources claim, is what the center-right offers adult individuals making personal choices.
That's the core of their argument on this point. Privacy over mandated inclusion.
Okay, but we still have to tackle the elephant in the room, the policies that do get a lot of attention.
The ones targeting gender issues, you mean, like protecting women's sports or laws concerning minors and medical transitions.
Exactly. How do the sources square those with this idea of live and let live?
They address it directly. The argument presented is that these specific policies, while controversial, are generally aimed at specific situations like competitive sports or irreversible medical procedures for children.
So for the average adult crossdresser,
Who isn't seeking puberty blockers for kids or trying to compete in, say, the Olympics women's division, these policies, according to the sources, don't touch your world.
it's presented as a targeted pushback, not a blanket condemnation.
Right. The framing in the material is that conservatives see this pushback not as hate, but as necessary line drawing to prevent what they view as overreach, like, again, forcing schools to teach certain gender ideologies or mandating pronoun usage against someone's beliefs. It's about preserving choice and autonomy for everyone, including those who disagree.
This leads into that interesting idea the sources raise, voluntary acceptance versus coerced tolerance. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, it's quite central to their argument. They contrast top-down mandates like DEI initiatives with organic, community-based acceptance.
And they have an example.
They do. There's an anecdote about a cross-dresser in Florida. She joined her local Republican Women's Auxiliary group, attending meetings on FEM.
Wow, okay. How did that go?
Apparently, really well. The source says she bonded with the other women over shared values, things like family, faith, community involvement. Her way of dressing just wasn't the focus.
It became a non-issue.
Essentially, her quote captures it. They care about my character, not my hemline. The point the sources draw is that this acceptance was voluntary, built on shared ground, not forced by a policy.
Which they argue is more genuine and sustainable.
Exactly. It sidesteps the resentment that can come with feeling forced to accept something.
And the sources blame the media for missing this nuance.
Pretty heavily, yes. They claim that because many media outlets lean left, they tend to frame any conservative stance on gender, even nuanced ones, about protecting minors or preserving fairness in sports as simple regression or bigotry.
Ignoring the difference between policy specifics and personal lives.
That's the claim. The sources urge you to look at the actual policies. Is there a nationwide dress code being proposed? Are the IRS auditing people for buying skirts? The answer, they point out, is no. The focus is elsewhere.
So freedom through benign neglect, almost.
Or perhaps more actively, freedom through a focus on individual discretion and economic liberty, which inherently protects privacy.
Let's pivot slightly again. The sources also bring up meritocracy. How does that fit in?
They argue that center-right environments, particularly in professional fields like tech or finance, often emphasize meritocracy, the idea that your talents, not your attire, define you.
And this is seen as beneficial for cross-dressers.
Yes, because the focus is on your skills and contribution, not your personal life or identity markers, unless you choose to make them relevant. It aligns with that idea of keeping the personal sphere separate and respected.
It connects back to that broader American spirit theme too, doesn't it?
It does. The analysis suggests that cross-dressing, in its rebellious individualism, actually taps into that classic American archetype celebrated by the right, the pioneer, the maverick, the person who defies norms on their own terms.
So it's not seen as contradictory. You can admire Reagan and channel Marilyn Monroe.
That's precisely the point they make. It's presented as wholeness, not hypocrisy. Your political beliefs about limited government and economic freedom exist in one sphere, and your personal expression exists in another autonomous sphere.
And there's another specific story illustrating this.
Yes, the software engineer in North Carolina codes complex systems by day, enjoys cross-dressing in his off hours. He explicitly credits red state freedoms for his peace.
Because nobody's bothering him about it.
Exactly. His quote is telling, "No one's policing my weekends. That's liberty." It's that non-interference principle again.
The sources also make a point of distinguishing cross-dressers from trans individuals seeking medical transition. Right.
Yes, that's an important clarification they make. They note that many cross-dressers enjoy the aesthetic, the performance, the feeling, without identifying as transgender or seeking medical interventions like hormones or surgery.
And for those individuals.
Conservative policies, focused as they are on specific areas like youth medical procedures or sports, generally leave adults autonomous in their non-medical personal choices.
There's another quote related to this.
Yes, from a lifelong Republican cross-dresser. I dress for joy, not ideology. Government's role ends at consent. It really reinforces that boundary between personal expression and political demands.
Which ties back to the critique of forced inclusivity, like DEI mandates.
Right. The argument presented is that true live and let live means not forcing acceptance or prioritizing identity over merit, which they claim DEI sometimes does. Genuine acceptance in this view arises from shared values and mutual respect within a framework of personal liberty, not from mandates.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up,
Sure.
if we distill the core takeaway from these sources, what is it?
It's essentially this. The material argues strongly that cross-dressing, at its heart, is apolitical. And counterintuitively, perhaps, it finds a strong resonance, even amplification, within Republican values of personal authority and individual liberty.
That framework is presented as a kind of shield.
A shield against pressures from both sides, against social conservatives who might disapprove personally but are politically focused elsewhere, and against progressive activists demanding ideological conformity as the price of expression.
So what's the bottom line here? What does this analysis suggest the center-right offers?
Well, according to these sources, it offers an invitation of sorts to eccentrics, to individualists, as long as they value liberty and self-reliance and adhere to that live and let live ethos.
Meaning, don't push your choices onto others via legislation or mandates.
That seems to be the condition. It's a transactional freedom. Radical self-expression is protected, but it doesn't come with a demand that society must fundamentally reorient itself to validate that expression. Strut your stuff, but don't demand a special parade route, metaphorically speaking.
It certainly flips the standard political script, which leaves us with a final thought, building on this.
Go on.
If this idea gains traction, if authenticity over activism becomes a more dominant mode of personal expression, how might that change the way identity groups align politically? Especially if they find that their core need, maybe simple privacy and freedom from interference, is potentially met by an ideology they've traditionally been told is hostile.